The last thing Clara saw of Providence was the hard set of Mayor Thompson's jaw. He stood on the steps of the meeting hall, a man made of straight lines and cold certainty, and pointed a single, unforgiving finger towards the grey teeth of the mountains. Behind him, the townspeople of Providence gathered like crows on a fence, their faces a mixture of grim satisfaction, nervous pity, and the flat, vacant curiosity of those watching a fate that was not their own. Beside Clara, a low growl rumbled in the deep chest of Fenrir, her German shepherd, the sound a stark contrast to the brittle silence of the crowd. He was all she had left of her father, this dog, and the worn axe handle pressing into her palm. The mayor's voice cut through the cold autumn air, each word a stone cast. This community has provided for its own. It has no surplus for strays, and no place for a woman without family or property to her name. The charter is clear. His words were a lie twisted from a truth, a loophole weaponized by a man who had always resented her father's quiet independence. The truth was that Mayor Thompson wanted the small plot of land her father's cabin stood on, the one with the creek running through it. This was not about law, it was about greed, dressed in the coarse burlap of civic duty. "You will take what is yours," the mayor continued, gesturing to the pathetic bundle at her feet, "and you will be beyond the town limits by sundown." There was no trial, no appeal. Just this public excision. At 18 years of age, Clara was being unmade, her life in this valley erased by a single proclamation. She looked from face to face in the crowd, searching for a flicker of defiance, a hint of shame. She saw none. She saw only the reflection of her own isolation. These were the people who had bought her father's furs, who had nodded to him in the street, who had watched her grow from a girl into a woman. Now, they watched her banishment as if she were a stranger, a ghost already departed. Fenrir pressed against her leg, a warm, solid anchor in a world that had turned to mist. She knelt, not in supplication, but to wrap her arms around the dog's thick neck, burying her face in his fur to hide the tremor in her chin. His presence was the only thing that kept the cold from shattering her bones. Straightening up, she shouldered her pack, gripped her father's axe, and without a single word, turned her back on the town of Providence. She did not look back. To look back would be to give them the satisfaction of her tears. She walked towards the mountains, Fenrir trotting silently at her heel, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her back. The judgment was passed. She was an outcast. Her survival, or her death, was now a private matter between her, the wilderness, and the coming winter. The town had washed its hands of her. But as she walked, a cold, hard thing began to form in her chest, a resolve as solid and unyielding as the granite peaks that awaited her. They thought they were sending her out to die. She would not give them the satisfaction. Her father had not been a man of many words, but the words he had spoken were chosen like stones for a foundation, solid, purposeful, and meant to last. He had died a month before her exile, a sudden fever stealing the quiet strength from his body in a matter of days, leaving Clara in a silence deeper than any she had ever known. He was a trapper, a man who lived by the rhythms of the seasons and the language of the forest, skills the farmers and merchants of Providence viewed with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. They called him the shadow of the mountain because he moved through the world with a quiet competence that made their loud, ordered lives seem fragile. After his death, that fragility turned to fear, and fear to cruelty. Mayor Thompson, who had long coveted her father's trapping lines and the small, defensible plot of land his cabin occupied, saw his opportunity. He found the cruelest clause in the town's founding charter, a relic from the first, desperate years, and polished it like a weapon. An unmarried woman, without the protection of a father, husband, or brother, was a ward of the town. And if the town council deemed her a potential burden, she could be expelled for the good of the whole. It was a law designed for a starving colony, not a town with a blacksmith, a general store, and 2 churches. But it was the law, and Thompson wielded it without mercy. Clara was now paying the price for her father's refusal to bend to the town's ways, for his quiet insistence on living a life apart. She remembered him sitting by the fire, his hands, weathered and strong, turning a piece of wood as he spoke. "The land gives you everything you need, Clara," he had told her, "but it demands respect. It doesn't care about pride or foolishness. It only cares about what works." He had taught her to read the sky, to understand the subtle shifts in the wind, to know which trees held the most heat in their wood. He taught her that preparation was not an act of fear but an act of respect for the power of the world. Now, his lessons were all she had. Her grief was a physical weight, a constant ache in her chest, but there was no time to indulge it. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. The town had taken her home, but they could not take what her father had built inside her mind. As she walked away from Providence, each step took her further from the life she had known and deeper into the wilderness her father had loved. She was vulnerable, stripped of everything but a few tools, a bedroll, and a dog. But she was not helpless. She was her father's daughter. And he had taught her how to survive. Her father had once spoken of a place, a deep scar in the face of the western cliffs, where the wind had carved a vast alcove into the stone. He had sheltered there during a freak blizzard years ago, describing it as a natural fortress, a place the winter could not touch. It took her 2 days of searching, with Fenrir casting wide circles ahead of her, his nose to the ground, before she found it. It was more magnificent and forbidding than she had imagined. A massive overhang of granite formed a stone ceiling 50 feet above, with the back wall curving deep into the mountain. It was not a damp, narrow cave, but a dry, hollowed-out amphitheater of rock, protected from the wind and open to the morning sun. Another person might have seen only a cold, empty space. Clara saw a foundation, a roof, and 3 solid walls, already built and paid for by 1,000,000 years of wind. The idea that sparked in her mind was born of his teaching and her own desperation. She would not live in the cave. She would build her home into it. She would construct a cabin that used the cave as its shell, a wooden house nestled inside a stone one. It was a strange, hybrid idea, but it felt right. It felt like something her father would have done. She began the next day, felling a tall, straight pine at the edge of the tree line. The work was brutal. The axe, so light in her father's hands, felt heavy and clumsy in hers. But she persisted, finding a rhythm, her muscles burning and then hardening. A week into her labor, a hunter from the town, a lean, sharp-faced man named Brant, came upon her clearing. He watched for a long moment as she and Fenrir, fitted with a crude harness of rope and leather, dragged a log towards the cave mouth. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "What's this then?" he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Building a house for the bears, girl?" Clara ignored him, her jaw tight, focusing on the strain of the log. He laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed off the rock face. "You'll be dead before the first real snow. That's no place for a person. It's a tomb." He turned and walked away, shaking his head. The story spread through Providence like a contagion. Cave Girl Clara, the name was spoken with laughter in the general store, with pitying shakes of the head in the church pews. Her desperate act of survival was twisted into a story of madness, proof that her father's wildness had taken root in her. The town, having cast her out, now used her as a cautionary tale, a ghost story to frighten children. Let them laugh, she thought, as she laid the first foundation log against the stone floor. Winter would have the last word. The days bled into one another, each one a testament to labor. Clara rose before the sun, her body a geography of aches, and worked until the twilight faded from the sky. Her world shrank to the simple, demanding realities of wood, stone, and muscle. She learned the personality of her father's axe, the precise angle at which it bit deepest into the pine, the satisfying thud of a clean cut. Her hands, once soft, became a landscape of calluses and blisters, a testament to her will. Fenrir was her constant shadow, her partner in the immense task. The big shepherd seemed to understand the urgency of their purpose. He helped her drag the smaller logs, his body low to the ground, muscles straining against the harness. He stood guard while she worked, his ears constantly swiveling, his low growls warning away the curious coyotes and the lone cougar that watched them from the high ridges. He was her guardian, her confidant, her only family. Slowly, miraculously, a structure began to rise from the stone floor. She built only the front wall and a small section of the 2 sides, the rest of the cabin formed by the curving rock of the cave itself. She notched the logs with painstaking care, remembering the way her father had shown her, fitting them together so tightly that a knife blade could not find a purchase between them. For the chinking, she made a thick, heavy paste of clay from a nearby stream bed, mixed with dried moss and grass. She pressed it into every crack and seam with her bare hands, feeling the cold mud squish between her fingers, knowing it would dry as hard as stone, sealing her home against the wind-searching fingers. The greatest challenge was the hearth. It had to be perfect. A poorly built chimney would fill the cabin with smoke and suffocate them in their sleep. She found a natural fissure in the cave's ceiling, a thin crack that led to the open air above. Using flat stone she hauled from a rock slide at the base of the cliff, she carefully constructed a fireplace against the back wall of the cave, tapering it into a chimney that funneled perfectly into the fissure. When she finally lit the first fire, she held her breath. The smoke hesitated for a moment, curling in on itself, and then, as if drawn by a celestial hand, it flowed upwards, a thin grey ribbon disappearing into the rock. She let out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. The heart of her home was beating. While the construction consumed her days, the nights were for stockpiling. She ventured further and further for firewood, felling dead, dry trees and hauling them back. The deep, unused recesses of the cave became her woodshed, a vast, dry space where she stacked the split logs. A mountain of fuel grew against the stone walls, a fortress of warmth against the coming cold. It was more wood than any single family in Providence would burn in 3 winters. But Clara was not preparing for a normal winter. She was preparing for war. The world began to change. The vibrant greens and golds of autumn faded to a uniform, somber brown. The morning air grew teeth, biting at any exposed skin. The first frosts appeared, painting the world in a delicate, temporary silver that melted away by noon. In Providence, the talk of a cave girl Clara began to change, too. The laughter became quieter, replaced by a grim certainty. Mayor Thompson, speaking after Sunday service, used her as a parable. The Lord provides for those who live in a community, under His laws, he intoned, his voice echoing in the rafters. Those who choose the wilderness, who choose to live like animals, will receive an animal's fate. His word solidified the town's judgment. To help Clara would be to defy not just the mayor, but God himself. A few, like Martha, the blacksmith's wife, felt a quiet dis-ease. She remembered Clara as a shy, serious girl who always had a kind word. She saw the hardness in the mayor's eyes and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. But she said nothing. Fear was a powerful silencer. One afternoon, Brant, the hunter, passed by her shelter again. This time, he did not laugh. He stopped at a distance, watching her split logs with a practiced, efficient swing. The pile of wood visible in the cave's mouth was already immense. He saw the sturdy wall, the wisp of smoke rising from the unseen chimney. He saw not madness, but a ferocious, unsettling purpose. "The animals are moving down from the high country," he called out, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. "I've never seen it this early. The old-timers are saying it's a bad sign." Clara paused, leaning on her axe, and simply nodded. She had seen the signs, too. The squirrels were frantic, their caches overflowing. The geese had flown south weeks ago. The air itself felt heavy, expectant. "That little wall won't stop what's coming, girl," Brant said, a note of genuine, if condescending, concern in his voice. "You'll freeze in there before the new year." He expected a plea, a cry for help. Instead, she just looked at him with her father's steady eyes, turned, and went back to her work. The thud of the axe splitting wood was her only reply. A week later, the first snow fell. It was not a gentle dusting, but a thick, wet blanket that clung to the trees and silenced the forest. In town, people looked at the sky and began to worry. Their woodpiles, stacked neatly against their houses, suddenly looked small, inadequate. They looked towards the mountains, towards the cliff where the mad girl was living in her cave, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt entered their minds. The winter was coming, and it was coming fast. The cold was not just a temperature, it was a presence. It prowled the edges of her clearing, a predator searching for a way in. One night, a new sound joined the whisper of the wind, a low, guttural howl that raised the fur on Fenrir's back. A small wolf pack, lean and hungry, had been driven from the higher elevations by the encroaching winter. They were bolder than any wolves her father had ever described, their hunger overriding their natural fear of humans. For 3 nights in a row, they circled her camp, luminous eyes glowing in the darkness just beyond the reach of her campfire's light. Fenrir was a storm of fury, his barks echoing like gunshots against the stone, his teeth bared in a silent promise of violence. Between the dog and the fire, the wolves were kept at bay, but the siege frayed Clara's nerves. Sleep became a shallow, fitful thing. On the 4th night, they grew bolder still. While she was inside the cabin for a moment, stoking the hearth, a pair of them darted in, quick as shadows, and snatched a deer hide she had been painstakingly curing. It was more than just a loss of a blanket, it was a loss of weeks of work, a loss of precious resources. The incident solidified something in her. The threat of winter was not an abstract concept, it was a tangible thing with claws and teeth. The wilderness was not cruel, but it was unforgivingly neutral. It would claim anyone who was not prepared. A week later, the world offered a dress rehearsal for its main performance. A storm, born in the northern peaks, descended on the valley with breathtaking speed. It was not the great blizzard, but a vicious preview. The wind shrieked, and snow fell so thickly that the world beyond her cabin wall ceased to exist. In Providence, the storm wreaked havoc. The roof of the livery stable collapsed under the weight of the heavy, wet snow. A dozen homes had their shutters torn away. The people, huddled inside, listened to the storm's fury and felt a primal fear. Their neat, orderly world was being dismantled by a force they could not control. But inside the cave, it was a different story. The mountain took the brunt of the wind's rage, the sound of it a distant roar, like a faraway ocean. Her small wooden facade stood firm, protected by the massive stone overhang. The fire in her stone hearth burned hot and steady, its light filling the small cabin with a warm, golden glow. She sat on the floor, mending a tear in her father's old coat, with Fenrir asleep at her feet, his flank rising and falling peacefully. The storm was a test. And her strange, mocked shelter had passed. She was safe. She was warm. She was ready. It began not with a roar, but with a hush. The world fell silent. The wind died completely, and the sky turned a flat, ominous shade of grey, the color of a fresh bruise. An unnatural stillness settled over the valley, I held breath before a scream. Then, the first flakes began to fall. They were not the gentle, drifting flakes of a pleasant snow day, but small, hard pellets, like grains of sand, driven by a wind that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Within an hour, the world outside Clara's wooden wall was gone, erased by a churning vortex of white. The blizzard had arrived. It was not a storm, it was a physical dismantling of reality. The wind was a solid thing, a battering ram that threw itself against the mountain. The sound was immense, a constant, high-pitched shriek that vibrated deep in Clara's bones. The snow did not fall, it flew horizontally, burying everything in its path with terrifying speed. In Providence, the world ended at each family's front door. The town that had seemed so permanent, so solid, was revealed to be nothing more than a collection of fragile boxes scattered in the path of a leviathan. Houses groaned and shuddered under the assault. The cold, no longer just outside, began to seep in. It crept through floorboards, through window frames, through the very logs of the walls. Families huddled around their fireplaces, feeding them with a growing sense of panic. Their firewood, stored in outdoor sheds and lean-tos, was now as inaccessible as if it were on the moon, buried under impenetrable drifts of snow. The temperature plummeted. The town's confidence, its righteous certainty, began to freeze and crack. Fear, cold and sharp, took its place. But inside the mountain, a different reality existed. Clara's cave cabin was an island of tranquility in the heart of the maelstrom. The deep, ancient stone of the mountain absorbed the cold, its massive thermal inertia creating a perfect insulation. The wind scream was a muted, distant howl. Her front wall, sheltered from the direct blast, held firm. Inside, the air was warm and still. The fire in her stone hearth roared, fed by the seemingly endless supply of wood stacked in the deep recesses of the cave. The light danced on the log walls, casting a warm, living glow on the small space. She had food, dried meat, preserved berries, sacks of flour. She had water from a small seep that trickled down the back wall of the cave, pure and clean. She and Fenrir were not just surviving, they were living. While the town that had cast her out fought a desperate battle against the cold, Clara sat by her fire, calm and secure, listening to the heart of the storm. For 3 days, the world remained white and screaming. In Providence, desperation curdled into despair. The community, once so tightly bound by its shared judgment of Clara, began to splinter under the pressure. Every family was an isolated kingdom of cold, hoarding what little warmth they had left. At the blacksmith's house, Martha watched her young son, Thomas, struggle for every breath. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue, and a dry, rattling cough shook his small frame. The last of their firewood had turned to embers hours ago. The cold in the room was a physical presence, a predator stalking her child. Her husband, a strong, capable man, sat helpless, his face a mask of grim defeat. "He won't make it through another night," he whispered, the word swallowed by the howl of the wind. The cold is taking him. In that moment, something inside Martha broke. The fear of the mayor, the fear of public opinion, it all burned away, consumed by the fierce, primal fire of a mother's love. She looked at the door, buried in a drift that reached halfway up its height. An idea, insane and desperate, took hold. Brandt's mocking words echoed in her mind, "Cave girl Clara, the girl in the tomb." But what if the tomb was a sanctuary? "I'm going out," she said, her voice steady. Her husband stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Don't be a fool, Martha. You'll die out there." "No one can survive in this. Thomas will die if I stay here," she replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. She bundled herself in every piece of wool and fur she could find until she was a shapeless mound of clothing. She kissed her son's feverish forehead, a silent promise, and forced the door open against the crushing weight of the snow. The storm hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and blinding her. She had only a vague memory of the direction Brandt had pointed, a general sense of the cliffs to the west. Stumbling, falling, crawling, she pushed her way through the maelstrom. The cold was a living entity, clawing at her, draining the life from her limbs. She was about to give up, to surrender to the soft, warm embrace of freezing to death, when a sound cut through the wind's shriek. A bark. Loud, sharp, and close. Hope, fierce and sudden, surged through her. She crawled towards the sound and collapsed at the foot of a wooden wall set impossibly into the face of a cliff. The last thing she remembered was a door swinging open and a blast of miraculous, impossible warmth. Fenrir's barking had saved her. Clara, seeing the half-frozen woman at her doorstep, dragged her inside without hesitation. Martha gasped, her lungs aching from the sudden shift from brutal cold to profound warmth. She stared, bewildered, at the roaring fire, the neatly stacked supplies, the calm security of the small home. Her eyes met Clara's, and she broke down, sobbing. "My boy," she gasped, the words torn from her. "The cold, he's dying." Please, in that moment, Clara faced the ultimate test. Here was a member of the community that had condemned her, begging for the very thing they had denied her, a chance to survive. Clara looked down at the desperate, weeping woman, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the bitter satisfaction of vindication. She could have closed the door. She could have let the storm deliver the same cold judgment the town had delivered to her. But then she looked past Martha, into the memory of her own grief, the fresh pain of her father's death. She saw the face of a sick child, and the hard, cold knot of anger in her chest dissolved. Her father had taught her to respect the wilderness, not to imitate its indifference. He had taught her that survival wasn't about hoarding what you had, it was about having the wisdom to know what was truly important. She went to the back of the cave where she had built a small, sturdy sled for hauling firewood. She loaded it with as many split logs as it could carry, then added 2 thick fur blankets from her own bed. Martha watched, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning gratitude. "The dog will lead," Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. Stay close to the sled. The journey back was a waking nightmare. The wind tore at them, and the snow was so deep it was like wading through a frozen sea. But Fenrir was magnificent. With his head down and his powerful shoulders straining, he seemed to smell the path, guiding them through the white chaos with an unerring instinct. They arrived at the blacksmith's house like apparitions, covered in ice, the sled a treasure chest of warmth. Martha's husband stared, speechless, as they piled the wood by the hearth and coaxed the embers back to life. As the warmth began to fill the room, color returned to the sick child's face. The news of the miracle spread through the buried town with impossible speed. A desperate message, shouted from one snow-choked house to the next, passed through the frozen streets. The cave girl was alive. And she had firewood. The blacksmith, his heart full of a shame so profound it burned, gathered a few of the town's strongest men. They followed the faint tracks left by the sled, a lifeline leading them out of their frozen prison. When they reached the cave, they stopped, stunned into silence. They saw what Brant had seen, but now they saw it with new eyes. They saw not madness, but genius. The sturdy wall, the smoking chimney, and beyond it, the staggering, unbelievable mountain of firewood. It was a cathedral of preparation. Later that day, even Mayor Thompson was forced to come. His own house was freezing, his authority shattered. He stood at the entrance to the cabin he had effectively sentenced her to, the icy wind at his back and the impossible warmth pouring from her doorway. He looked at the girl he had cast out, now the sole keeper of his town's survival. All the pride, all the righteous certainty, was gone, frozen to death in the blizzard. "We were wrong," he stammered, his words hanging in the air, small white clouds of surrender. Clara simply nodded, then turned to the waiting men. "Take what you need for your families," she said. "The sleds can carry more if you work together." There was no triumph in her voice, no hint of "I told you so." There was only the quiet authority of someone who had faced the truth and prepared for it. When the great blizzard finally broke, the world was remade. The valley lay buried under a silent, pristine blanket of white, the sun glittering on its surface with a painful brilliance. The town of Providence had survived, but it was not the same town. The storm had scoured away its pride, leaving behind a raw and humbled community. They were saved not by their mayor or their charter, but by the foresight of the young woman they had discarded. The name Cave Girl Clara was never spoken again. In its place, a new name emerged, spoken with a quiet reverence. That stone hearth, her home, built into the rock, became a symbol of a different kind of strength, a wisdom that was patient, quiet, and deeply connected to the land. Mayor Thompson quietly stepped down from his position that spring, his authority melted away with the snow. The town council offered Clara her father's land back, along with a formal, public apology. She accepted the apology but politely refused the land. Her home was here now, in the place she had made for herself. People began to make the journey to her cliffside dwelling, not to mock, but to learn. They saw how she had built with the landscape, not against it. They saw her clever systems for collecting water, for storing food, for living in harmony with the cycles of the seasons. The lessons her father had taught her, once seen as the eccentricities of a wild man, were now recognized as a deep and essential wisdom. She taught them how to read the signs of a hard winter, how to choose the right wood for a fire that would last the night, how to build a shelter that borrowed its strength from the earth itself. She never raised her voice, never spoke of their betrayal. Her quiet competence was a more powerful teacher than any sermon. She was no longer an outcast, she had become the town's anchor, its conscience. Her story became a legend, told around fireplaces on cold winter nights, a story for the generations to come. It was a tale about a girl who was thrown away and found her strength not in revenge, but in resilience. It was a lesson that the deepest cold is not in the winter wind, but in the human heart, and that the greatest warmth comes from a fire built with your own two hands. Years later, an old woman with eyes as clear and steady as a winter sky would stand at the mouth of her cave home, a pack of loyal dogs at her side, descendants of the great Fenrir. She would look out at the town of Providence, a community that had learned humility, that now stacked its firewood high and deep long before the first frost. Her legacy was not written in any book or carved on any stone. It was written in the smoke rising from the chimneys of the homes she had saved. It was a legacy of survival, a testament to the enduring truth that true shelter is not a place you find, but a thing you build, from foresight, from courage, and from a grace strong enough to forgive those who once left you for dead in the cold.